Okay, welcome everyone who is joining us today from all over Asia and Europe for this webinar on Anticipatory Leadership Mindset, organized in partnership with the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies and the Development Academy of the Philippines. My name is Freya Chow-Paul and I'm the Youth Project Lead here at the Asia Europe Foundation, or ASEF. And today I have the pleasure of guiding us through today's session. At this point, allow me to give everyone a brief run through of what we have prepared for you for this hour-and-a-half session. I will begin with a short introduction to the context of today's webinar before handing over to Mr. Lasse Jonassen for his keynote presentation. This will be followed by a panel discussion and Q&A with distinguished experts who are ready to share their insights and perspectives on what it means to have an anticipatory leadership mindset. For the Q&A session, you will all have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ask questions. And for this purpose, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel, where you can pose your questions. You can also upvote any questions that you find interesting or even reply to them and engage in discussion. We will also ask you to use the chat to introduce yourselves, as I can see that you're already doing. So please feel free to introduce yourselves and where you're from so our panelists can also see. Without further ado, I think we can get started. So firstly, the context of this session. As many of you will know, ASEF is an intergovernmental organization where we're working to strengthen mutual understanding between Asia and Europe. Across different thematic areas, we bring together a variety of governmental and civil society stakeholders to further strengthen the connectivity and opportunities for collaboration to solve global challenges between the regions. This is our flagship project, the ASEF Young Leaders Summit, which is a leadership development program for young leaders across Asia and Europe to learn, exchange, and connect with each other. And this session today is part of the ASEFYLS Capacity Training 2026, for which we have 95 selected young leaders. But we are very happy also to be able to open up today's session to more young leaders, and I'm very happy to see that many of you have joined us here today. At ASEF, this topic of anticipatory leadership for a human-centered future is a brand new topic, and it focuses on how we can prepare young people for the kind of leadership that is needed for a more human-centered society, and who can use future-oriented tools to guide present-day decisions. So today's session really aims to give you food for thought and inspiration that we hope you take beyond the session for deeper discussions with your peers. We've brought together a group of expert speakers from very different backgrounds to share with you their insights and what anticipatory leadership looks like to them. So I think with that, we are ready to start the first segment of the session, the keynote presentation. So to set the scene and provide an overview of anticipatory leadership, I'd like to invite Mr. Lasse Jonassen to join us. Lasse is the Chief Foresight Officer and Senior Futurist at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, where he helps organizations use strategic foresight, scenario planning, and anticipatory leadership to navigate long-term transformation. He draws on his experience as an executive in the financial sector and his background in business economics to connect futures thinking with concrete vision, strategy, and daily execution. And with that, I will stop sharing my slides. Thank you very much, Lasse, for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward for the dialogue and the questions afterwards. So let's jump into it. I want to start with this picture. It's a low resolution picture because I took it myself back in 2009, where I decided to cross the inner ice of Greenland. And when I took that decision, I had long conversations with a group of friends about how many do we wanted to be in the group for crossing the inner ice, and we had various conversations. We ended up saying we do believe that the optimal number of people are four four because then we had dedicated functions for each one of us. The first one, um, at this point, it's me taking the picture. Had the responsibility of looking 1, 2, 3 meters ahead. Is there a cleavage? Is there any obstacle that we need to be aware of? Second person in line had the obligation to say, okay, you might take the easiest part around this obstacle, but taking a slightly more difficult path will then open up for an easier path afterwards. Third person had a compass, had a map. That was, before the GPS and everything was digitized. It wasn't fully available back then. So third person had the map, the compass, and said, "Guys, now you have turned right twice. That means we are on our way back again. So please back on the right direction." Fourth person, we decided he was on vacation. He was basically there to enjoy, didn't have any big responsibilities. So that was the constellation we went over the inner ice with. Went well. Later on, a year later, we decided to go to Svalbard, slightly different area where the inner ice of Greenland is basically a polar desert. It's um, very even, not many challenges except for in the beginning and the end. Whereas when we went to Svalbard, we actually decided that we wanted to find a place where, with uh, some likelihood, no one had ever been before. So we went far away, and we used maps made in the 60s, not that accurate. And at that point, we actually realized that the fourth person had a quite crucial role. One of the times were when we realized the fourth person said, "Aren't we going the wrong way around this mountain?" He was right. We realized we could save one day's journey. That's well saved when you have packaged for food for a certain amount of days. So we were happy about that. Next time was actually a little bit more crucial. That was at the time we were walking in what is called whiteout. Whiteout is when there is either very strong snowfall or fog, so you cannot see anything around you. And since the surface is white, everything around you is white, you can just as well close your eyes. And actually, that's often what you do because then you sense wind direction, you have other senses that you can rely upon. But when you walk in the front and have no visibility, then you have no clue what is coming ahead. Whereas when you walk in the fourth position, you have three people in front of you, and you are pretty convinced that they're walking on the surface. So you have an idea about where should the horizon be. And at that time, suddenly I spotted something that looked weird. I shouted out to Michael, who was walking in front, and screamed, "Michael, stop." And Michael continued to walk and said, "Why?" And I just shouted very loud, "Stop now." He stopped, and just a few seconds later, it was clearing up slightly, and we realized he was standing maybe 2 or 3 meters ahead of what later showed to be a 40 meters downfall. At that time, we were not tied together. We didn't know we were walking in an area where this could be an option. So what we realized was that the fourth person actually had a role. And now this story is meant to be an analogy also for leadership. The fourth person is actually not on vacation. That's where you have a perspective that the other ones doesn't have. That is what I would call foresight. You really have the long-term view. And if you're occupied with daily tasks, this is difficult. The first person is looking 1, 2, 3 meters ahead. He's the operational person, is very tied up mentally with understanding what is happening just in front of him. Second guy looks a little bit further. That's the tactical level. And the third person has the responsibility for the strategy. That might be the CEO. So what I want you to consider is in an optimal setting where these are not persons. This is how much resources you spend on these four layers in an organization. What would be the right uh, level of resources you dedicate to these four roles? Consider that. You might give it a try in the chat. Of course, this is a difficult question because what are the circumstances? What are you walking into? And that's the exact point about anticipatory leadership. Before you know what you're heading into, before you know the landscape, the future around you, you will have difficulties deciding how many resources to dedicate to different functions because you have no idea about what you're walking into. So a little bit background for what is foresight. I used to say that everybody has assumptions about the future. That's a part of human conditions, but not everyone has an effective language to talk about it, nor a structured process behind. And coming from the discipline of foresight, I strongly encourage you to develop language about the future and develop a structured process. Because in essence, what I think leadership is, it is the ability to assess if your strategy, your business model, your offerings, your culture is fit for the future you're walking into. Not the present, also the present, sorry, also the present, but even more important, understanding what will be the future conditions and understanding how you can optimize for those. Very briefly, Freja gave a short introduction. I'm from the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and what we do is basically this, helping leaders, helping organizations, individuals to imagine, work with, and shape their future. I'm not going to spend much time speaking about this, but just a few numbers on the discipline of foresight, that it actually makes a difference. Back in 2008, there was a longitudinal study looking at a number of organizations. The orange dots were the ones that had a structured approach to foresight. The white ones didn't. Then the survey looked again at the same organizations 7 years later. They found that if you had a structured approach to foresight, the odds of being an overperformer in your industry would be 44%, whereas if you didn't have a structured approach, it would only be 15%. So what does that tell you? It tells two things. First of all, there were 7 years between those two measure points. So foresight is not something that will turn an organization into an overperformer overnight. It requires patience, time, but it also shows that in the long run, taking futures-oriented decisions, also with regards to your leadership, would likely put you in a better position. Now, organizations that manage to stay relevant over time, they have a number of common characteristics. One, they scan the environment around them, understand how does the future that you would be exposed to potentially look like. They use that insight to say, what does it mean for us as an organization? How would we be impacted by those potential changes in the future? Third, but not least, they mobilize resources towards a preferred future position. Now, I only write future here. I would say it's future position. You cannot define how the future look like as a leader, but you can define how you want to navigate in that future. Now, first part, that's foresight. Second part is strategy. And the third part is leadership. Now you might sit and say, no shit, Sherlock. Successful organizations are working with foresight, strategy, and leadership. That's hardly, a deep insight. But what I have realized is that a lot of organizations are not starting with the foresight part. They're not developing the common language. And if you don't have a common language of the landscape you're moving into, your strategy, decisions and and conversations becomes difficult because you have different assumptions about the future. And then you might disagree in the strategic choices, not because you disagree on the effect, but because you have different assumptions about the future. And if you don't have a structure and an effective language, you don't realize where the discrepancy is. The same goes for leadership. Now, uh, my age uh, uh, will lead to being in a segment where most of us are leading based on our experience. And that experience has been in a different environment than the future brings. So a lot of times I see leaders that are leading based on what has worked in the past, but those conditions are different from what will work in the future. So that's why I strongly argue that you need to do some considerations about how the future conditions will look like and adjust your leadership to those conditions. An example. We have worked throughout a little more than a year with one of the largest Nordic fashion companies. They reached out to us. They said, we want to have a dedicated foresight function. What would be the best way to start? What we realized after some conversations were we want to futures test your current strategy. So what we did was we made we conducted a lot of interviews with senior leadership, top management, and the strategy people. And we said, what are your assumptions about the future? And those people are well-educated, hardworking people. They had a lot of deep insights about the future, a lot of assumptions about how the future would evolve. We took that, then we compared it with a strategy and said, are there any assumptions about future conditions that your strategy hasn't addressed? And there were several points. First of all, they were very convinced that AI would deeply, fundamentally change how they would approach, how customers would interact with their product in the retail chain in 5 to 10 years. They didn't know exactly how, but they just felt that this will fundamentally change. There's also a lot of things about sustainability that they felt will change a lot, but they were not sure how it changed. Then we looked at the strategy. The strategy addressed what they were quite convinced would change, but the big uncertainties that potentially could uh, um, could disrupt the whole organization, that was not addressed in the strategy. And this is very common for organizations that once the future becomes uncertain and they cannot develop clear strategic direction, they they hesitate to do this. And this points to the leadership capacity that you need to put resources towards something that you not necessarily are sure how it evolves, but that you see potential changes can happen. Now, the traditional way of looking into the future is standing in the present. Some might say it's difficult to be elsewhere, right? But you stand in the present, you look into the future, um, then you look at what you have and what that would change. That's about looking at trends, incremental changes. It's about understanding data. What I would argue that anticipatory leadership is also about is once in a while immerse yourself into the future. Imagine how could the future look like 10 years out. Understanding how all the trends one by one will converge and create a complex dynamics that potential will lead to different futures where things are fundamentally different. And then go into that position and look back at the present and ask yourself, given that potential future, we will work with several scenarios very often. given those different scenarios, what would you want your organizations to do today? And how, as a leader, can you lead your organization into that future? And that leads to the anticipatory leadership framework that we have developed at CIFS, which is basically, in order to lead your organization into a future, you need to make some considerations. First of all, you need to consider the future conditions in which you are to lead into. And instead of trying to predict the exact conditions, you could develop it into, these are two boxes. In reality, it's a continuum. So one place within those two extremes would often be where you are. But this is a model. A model is by definition always wrong because it's a simplification of the reality. So where it's always wrong, sometimes it's useful, and this is what I encourage you to think in these boxes to use that as an inspiration for your leadership. So future conditions, those could be very turbulent, very uncertain, or they could be very stable. Most organizations have the sensation that the coming time is pushing the organization into conditions that are more turbulent than the past. But that's the first part. How does the future look like? Then, how do you want to approach this future? Most organizations have a business model that works, that has brought them where they are, so they are successful. That means that they're doing more of what they have always done. And in stable conditions, that would be the right box, which is called exploit. So if you are doing what you have done always in stable conditions, the leadership style that matches this would be in the efficiency zone, because you're trying to optimize in conditions that are known, well known, you know how to do this. Whereas if we take the other extreme, that would be very turbulent, uncertain times where you either choose to do what you have always done, focus on that, but you're not sure if that would make sense in the future. That will be the exploit zone, and you will be that will be the exploit path, and you will be in the resilience zone. In the resilience zone, you are exposed to changes, but you want to keep on doing what you always do, so you need to be resilient. You could also choose to change in those turbulent times, maybe adjust to new conditions, and that will be a transformation zone. And each of these zones will require different culture, different leadership style, different strategies. And that's what I've just summarized here. I won't go deep into it, but just saying that if you, for example, are in the efficiency zone, the leadership style would be doing more of what you are used to. That would typically be a very transactional, directive, outcome focused leadership style that would have the best fit here. The foresight approach to this, that would be what we call foresight tested, meaning scanning whether the assumptions that future conditions will continue to be the same, and that you can continue to do what you have always done. That will be an assumption you need to test. That will be the foresight approach. In a resilience zone, where conditions are changing around you, but you're not quite sure how to change to that, then the more suitable leadership approach will be adaptive, because you know you will be exposed to changes, but you're not sure what they would be. Very adaptive, situational, pragmatic. In this, it will still be a foresight tested way to conduct foresight, where you look at scenarios to understand how the future might evolve. The last zone I want to go into is the transformation zone. This is where you actually have decided to do something bold, something new. You're going in a direction that is unexplored before. This is foresight led. This is where you choose your direction based on a very, I would say, structured foresight approach where you see opportunities and you make some bets. And obviously, that environment, that culture in an organization, when you're moving into new conditions with a new approach, that also requires a different culture. So ending up with a quote or an argument here, I would say that we are all shaped by our past, but we are equally shaped by our assumptions about the future. And these assumptions is something you can develop and be better at and evolve. And those assumptions should also shape your leadership style. Thank you. Was that more than 20 minutes?
That was perfect. Thank you, Lasse. Lovely. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. And so, yeah, so prompt on time. Let me pop my slides back up. I was processing the quote you were leaving us with, and I didn't have a chance to get settled. Okay, thank you so much for this presentation. I was taking some notes as well, and I think it's a really nice way to start us off with the discussion today. And I think we'll be able to share your slides with the participants
Sure,
afterwards as well
sure.
if they take some so they can take some further notes. We will now move on to the panel discussion and Q&A segment of today's session. So I will ask Lasse to stay on the screen as I invite our expert panelists to join us for the discussion. Before I do that, I'm just going to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A function on your toolbar to ask any questions. We won't be taking questions from you cannot raise your hand and ask questions live, but we'll take questions through the Q&A function. So you can pop them all there for us. Let me bring our panelists in to join us now. First, allow me to introduce Dr. Lizan Parante Kalina, who is the Dean of the Graduate School of Public and Development Management at the Development Academy of the Philippines, where she's led the institutionalization of futures thinking in governance and public sector capacity building. She also founded the Philippines Futures Thinking Society and has designed pioneering foresight programs and courses, expanding GSPDM's graduate and certificate offerings to thousands of students nationwide, and contributed to UN and international platforms advancing futures-oriented public management. And next, I would like to welcome Dr. Marianne T. Sherling, who's a sociologist working at the intersection of emerging science, governance, and international cooperation, focusing on how societies can better anticipate and govern scientific and technological change. At the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, she develops governance tools, learning experiences, and international capacity building initiatives, and also serves as strategic advisor to the CERN-hosted Open Quantum Institute and as a board member of Geneva Macro Labs. Thank you very much for your time and for accepting our invitation to join us today, both of you. A reminder again, you can put your questions to Lasse, Lizan, and Marianne in the Q&A function. So I think I'll pop my screen sharing off so we can see everyone a bit better. Let's start perhaps from hearing from Lizan and then from Marianne. I invite you both to introduce your work, what you think it means to have an anticipatory leadership mindset, and perhaps share any initial reflections following Lasse's presentation. Lizan, would you like to start?
Thank you, Freya, and thank you, Lasse, for the very inspiring sharing of your initiatives, and likewise how important anticipatory leadership is in corporation, be it public or private. And I really agree with you that developing leadership that would better enhance organizations is learning the language of the future. And introducing futures thinking is not an easy task. especially in the Philippines, for example. We've been doing this in a very short period of time, like 5 years already, and we are still in that level of educating and building capacities to understand what is foresight, what is future thinking, and what are the benefits of these. So in the Philippines, my work really is on capacity building, especially for our public sector leaders, how to change their mindset from short-termism to long-termism. And when in your discussion earlier, you talk about leadership is really mobilizing resources, but you're really looking at or preparing, in the future, 10 years from now, how will your organization look like, or how will it really create a better position in the community or in the market. So I've learned a lot actually in your discussion earlier, and I was taking down notes likewise. And you also mentioned that you've been doing this work to help leaders imagine their work, in the future by doing something today, so that there will be a preparation. So that's also the thing that we are doing here. It's more on changing the mindsets, because changing mindset would really, incur affecting or at least influencing your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. So for now, in the Philippines, we've capacitated the number of public sector employees. Just this afternoon, I just changed location from the third floor down here, because we're doing capacity building for our local leaders. So we have the Department of Interior and Local Government. So they are, leading local government officials, the mayors and the governors. So I think I have to stop there and give the floor to Dr. Marian. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think we have a very different perspective of how anticipatory leadership is being considered and looked at from JESDA. Marianne, would you like to share a bit more?
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisan, and also Lasse for your deliberations. So lovely to meet you all. I'm Marianne Schörling, and I represent the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator Foundation. It's a very long name, but basically, as the name suggests, it's about anticipation, it's about science and diplomacy. And perhaps before I comment on the points made by both panelists, let me introduce very quickly what we do at JESDA to kind of give the right framing. We were created on the premise that scientific developments are increasingly emerging faster than our governance systems and institutions, international cooperation mechanisms can adapt. And our role is therefore not really to predict the future, but to identify emerging scientific developments early enough so that societies can deliberate and build capacities, but also act while there is still room for to shape outcomes. And so, building on the first presentation that we have heard, we define anticipation as a forward-looking mindset. So this really much speaks to what you described, Lasse. And this is combined, this forward-looking mindset is combined with the capacity for deliberate actions in the present. So this actionable knowledge, translating knowledge into action is a very important point. An anticipatory mindset is therefore not necessarily to predict what will happen. Again, Lasse, this is very similar how you described with the sense making, but it is about, in the first place, being curious for what is emerging in the different fields of development, but also questioning assumptions and considering multiple possibilities. Now, it's also recognizing that the future is not something that simply happens to us, but that it can still be influenced. This is something really important, because when you look into the different fields, let's say you gave the example of the fashion industry, we can see that often seeing what is outlined to might be happening can be paralyzing. So it's really also a dimension of having the confidence that we are not subject to change, but we can actually co-shape change. So being in really in this pilot in a pilot seat rather than co-pilot or even a passenger. I think that picture really draws also to what you described, Lasse. And what I found really interesting is how, Lasse, you were putting emphasis on assumptions and how we address assumptions. So, as a sociologist, my background is in sociology. I did a PhD in health sociology and in complex decision making at a societal level. And what I find very interesting is that we started the discussion today by looking into organizations and individuals, so the institutional, I would say, meso level. What we do at Jester, we kind of look at the three levels from the micro to from the micro to the macro level. So from individuals to the society or even global level, which means that we look into how do assumptions differ between scientists, governments, businesses, citizens, and international organizations about the same development that we can look at. So we can look at new technology from very different perspectives, and depending on the perspective we take, we have different assumptions. So the challenge is not only creating a shared language, I would say, within organizations, but creating enough shared understanding across entire ecosystems to enable collective action. And Freya, in one of our discussions, I was raising a point about trust, and I want to put this over forward now. I would argue that in the endeavor to navigate uncertainty, we need to also put an emphasis on how we create safe bases for trust, so that as we look into supporting anticipatory leaders, how can we help them to have trusted spaces where they can experiment and build on each other's perspectives to to kind of sketch potential solutions to a given challenge. One last point, and then I leave the others to react, is that that this requires a competence of listening and of as well not coming to consensus right away, but actually being in a discourse that has a lot of controversy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Lasse, do you have any starting points you'd like to, or any points you'd like to respond to first? Or we can go to some questions.
So a lot of interesting perspectives here, and I fully agree on the last point that we can be just as good at the anticipatory element if that doesn't lead to some kind of action, then it doesn't matter. We need to couple those two things together. I think it's that's crucial to understand how we go from seeing a necessity to change, to actually coordinating that change, and whether that is in a commercial company, if in a nonprofit organization, or at governmental level, that is extremely important. And understanding those three layers is crucial, and how they connect. And I think that's definitely what we need. We need leaders that can anticipate and understand those mechanisms, but also using those to create some actions. And I think given, I work with that as well, but I don't have a sociology background. I'm grown up with an economic background where our assumption is just that all individuals are acting rational. And that's just an assumption that is wiped out the day you walk out of university. So it would be interesting to hear, both of your perspectives on that.
Thank you, Lasse. Yeah, I think this action point is really key. I'd like to start with this one maybe to ask. We've seen, thank you, Lasse, in your presentation, the different models as well, or the different types of leadership that we see and how you respond to things. And when we've seen the evidence also of the strength of using a more anticipatory leadership mindset to deal with uncertainty and rapid change. Do any of you want to share actually perhaps some examples of this difference, or maybe more concretely, how in your work that you've seen either in government, Lisanne, or Marianne, with the stakeholders that you work with, where has these traditional leadership models maybe not worked, and you've seen anticipatory leadership models work better on a specific issue or example? If any of you have some, I've dropped this question a little bit on you here, so I appreciate if you take a minute. But yeah, if you have some examples for us.
Oh, yeah, can I go ahead? Yeah. So, well, we always say that leadership is based on context. It depends on the environment. It depends on the situation. It can be transformational. It can be transactional, or it can be authoritarian. But at the same time, it can be inspirational. But with the introduction of foresight and future thinking, as I mentioned by last year earlier, anticipatory leadership is very important for you to really look at the next 10 years, for example, of your organization. The assumption in government service is that it's business as usual. It's business as usual. There's lack of creativity. There's lack of imagination. And when you introduce innovation, it's not really about innovation that would somehow introduce more value in the existing product or service. So it's like the usual thing. But in introducing anticipatory mindset or anticipatory leadership, that would somehow trigger their minds, their brain cells to do something better, and that they can do that actually. Because if no one is pushing or leading them to be anticipatory, they will always be in the stage of business as usual because of the many bureaucratic controls happening in the government, and that's really our experience. But you know what? Anticipatory mindset or leadership is in it in us. It depends on how we exercise it because we're doing anticipation in our daily lives actually. But putting a structure, putting systems or mechanism, learning tools, learning methodologies is, of course, would somehow um, have this responsibility from the end of those in the government sector leading that anticipatory leadership or mindset. So in our case, when we introduce anticipatory leadership or mindset, there's this, of course, at first, oh, that's difficult. It's difficult. We can't do that. It's difficult to learn future thinking, but we really push them to do workshops for them to have that creative mind, to have that, ideas that would really push the envelope, go out of the box. But the of course, they have to, no, we have to do research. They have to extend time on how to be anticipatory. So yeah, it's very helpful in introducing that kind of mindset because, like for example, what this is my last example. In the Philippine Navy, they have modern equipment, but their mindset is traditional. So they requested us if you can give us this anticipatory mindset leadership in order for us to really use our modern equipment because it requires different skill sets and competencies. So there, somehow we introduced that kind of, what are the parameters to have this anticipatory mindset. So it helped them actually. So that's, some of the examples that's, happening in the Philippine government.
Thanks, Lisa. I want to very quickly ask you a cheeky follow-up question, which is that we know that this is a youth program, right? Do you find that there's a difference in response level to, senior leaders in the top senior management of government compared to junior team members? Is there a difference in response or openness to this?
Oh, well, in my experience, yes, there is because, young leaders are more, they're more agile and dynamic, of course, and they're open to new ideas. Well, senior leaders, okay, I'm already in my age of retirement, so I would rather be at the business as usual scenario. But these, young leaders, they're really more energetic and dynamic. So we train, and mentor more young leaders in order for us to create a critical mass, and that's very important.
Thanks, Ethan.
Can I add a short perspective to that? Because
Sure.
I fully agree in that, but I also see a paradox here because very often young leaders are lower in the hierarchy, so their responsibility is to optimize within an existing frame. So the relevance for the future for their decision-making process is not the same as the very seniors because they're actually responsible. If you are the top general secretary or whatever is the title, then you have the responsibility of setting the direction for your organization. So there is a mismatch in who is often find this interesting and who can use it in their practice. So there's some tensions there that the young people and leaders who find this extremely interesting, they see the frictions that they cannot throw this into action.
Yeah. There's a good comment in the chat from Alice, who says, young leaders are also the ones inheriting the consequences of the decisions today, that, they're the ones who will take on those leadership roles in the future, but whether or not they will be in a position yet to change those systems. But we do have a lot of young leaders who are leading within their own youth organizations, for example, in the group today. Shall we hear from Marianne? Would you like to jump in here or on the overarching question?
Sure, and I'll try to be very precise. Actually, I love the example of the Philippines. So I can build on that with a concrete example from our work. We worked with the Philippines last year on quantum diplomacy. And what struck me, so we JESTA and the Open Quantum Institute, which is one example I brought for you today. The Open Quantum Institute is an example of a multilateral, multi-stakeholder initiative that is really a new alternative to the old system, I would say. It is a way to be agile and respond to the need to provide spaces for anticipatory leaders. And so what happened, and the example that you gave is perfect, or the observation you gave, is that we created a space together with the Philippine quantum community to have it was a summit of 3 days, and we talked about anticipatory leadership. And it was amazing to see how established representatives of the Philippine government and other government representatives of other regions of Southeast Asia, how they were actually debating on how they implement anticipatory leadership in their work. And I could see that it was both, it was the young next generation of leaders that was involved and the more established senior. And it showed that in order to create opportunities, we need, what I said before, an ecosystem approach to see how we can have those spaces to bring both groups together. And it allows to actually create relationships between different generations across sectors. So we didn't only have scientists from quantum present, but also representatives of the social science, of humanities, of policy making, to again think about the opportunities. In that regard, it was specifically about a certain technology, but you could use that approach as well for any other type of future thinking. And I felt that this was a demonstration of what we call the window of anticipation. So the window of anticipation is this window where we start from at the moment today, and we look into the possibilities of the future. So we can put a time mark. We can say, well, let's think of a moment in 5 years, or in 10 years, or in 25 years. So I think we have to be very specific of which moment we're addressing to kind of navigate the future. And then we then translate that time frame into very concrete assumptions that we have. And ideally, in our case, we benefit from the fact that we focus on science diplomacy in anticipatory leadership, and we then can use scientific evidence of what is likely to happen and how this is being how this is impacting our future choices. So I think when we think about anticipatory leadership, we need to think of how we can have spaces where we allow for daring to think out of the box and also challenge each other's perspectives.
Yeah, and I think one observation in that is that in order to make changes, make choices, everything is prioritization, right? You have to dedicate resources and that towards something, and that compromises something else. And if you are to think about how you want to do something that will optimize or benefit the future in some way, you need to have incentives to do that. And a lot of studies have showed that the more you nurture something, the more you focus on something, the more you actually empathize with that. Just think of a distant uncle that you haven't spoken with for decades, right? How much would you sacrifice to optimize his conditions? Probably not as much if you have spent time with him every week. And actually, there was some studies of brain activation. And when you think about yourself in the future, 20 years out, you use the same regions as if you think about a distant uncle. So you actually do not empathize with your future self. And when you do not do that, you don't want to sacrifice much for your future self. You don't want to compromise much with your conditions today. But you can change that. Just as spending time with the distant uncle, you can spend some more time thinking about the future. And it actually shows that you are, how much you want to, I forgot what you call that, but the discount rate in which you use to say future benefits, how much do you discount that? That falls. So future conditions will be much more in your mind and in the decision maker's mind if you spend more time thinking about the future. So I think just exactly what you speak to, Marianne, there, spending some more time understanding future conditions. And then, of course, the difficult thing becomes that we have multiple potential futures. So we don't know exactly what we need to do, but there are some commonalities. And I'm sure, I mean, for speaking of quantum, we know there is a direction. We know it's coming. We know we would be better off with doing something already now.
Freya, quickly.
Go ahead.
About quantum in the Philippines, they are also our partner, the Philippine Quantum Society, and we had a conference. We hosted that last months ago, and of course, one of the experts there told us that today is AI, but tomorrow it's quantum. So, you know, it. I have this realization taking off from last discussion that when there's tension between senior and junior leadership, I think leaders should really explore what's next, no? And what are the different handles that we can look into in order for us to improve organizations. Just like, of course, one is quantum, and it's a continuing for me. Anticipatory leadership. It's really about a continuous exploration on many things that would redound to the benefit of the community or the organization.
Absolutely. And if I build on that and see the comments in the chat, there's action on the question of age and representation of youth. I think that's an excellent point that you are making right now here, because when we think about anticipatory leadership, I think some might have this idea that only senior leaders are being meant. No, I think it's an excellent example of the fact that this is not a question of age, and yes, it's a question of mindset, and it's also a question of openness. And I find, let me give you one example. What we do sometimes at Chester is we offer to different communities simulations, games, serious games. So it's a serious play where you step into a role play, and Freya can share more about, because we collaborate on that. And what we do is we put ourselves in the future. So we present a future scenario, and then we go back to the present and use the future to build the present, meaning that we ask ourselves, well, with that scenario in mind, how could an alternative future look like? And actually, what decisions do we want to take today? So this is it's not about predicting, but it just helps to put yourself into an anticipation mindset, to envision yourself, if X, Y, Z might happen, what kind of questions should we start asking? And then it shows that we need to think about the future ethics, the future governance, the future security implications, the future dual use discussion, the future questions of human rights of science, etc. So you become, by examples, very concrete on the type of questions you start to ask. And that I have seen is not a question of age. I feel that when I involve young leaders in that discussion, it's just incredible what kind of solutions or discussions are evolving. So this is an encouragement to all the 151 participants in this call to really see the value of how we kind of are bypassing traditional leadership. If you want to do a comparison, traditional leadership really looks into the visible challenges. But I think you as young leaders, you represent a competence, which is that you engage with emerging developments. And that means that we don't wait for certainty. We actually are able to create agency under uncertainty. And that's an ability that I feel that young leaders are cultivating more than senior leaders. I don't have any statistics on that, but this is what I feel observing in our engagements.
Yeah, I want to add
Go ahead.
quickly just this point that I think maybe as a very present example. I know there's a lot of youth organizations in the cohort talking about climate change, for example, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And climate change, I think, is such a long-term concept that this is something that would really benefit from thinking ahead. And why people maybe find it harder to take action nowadays is because they haven't, like to say, and like with the simulation games, you haven't put yourselves in those steps ahead. However many films we've now seen where we've had disaster scenarios that have been climate related, you cannot quite connect yourself with what those impacts are yet to be able to then take action in the present. And that's what is maybe one of the missing links. But we have so many young leaders here today who are working in, youth organizations focused on climate change, and that's something maybe you can start to think about in your work. Lasse, do you want to add on here?
Yeah, and then now I'll just add on your comments instead. So many interesting topics, and I do think that the climate, the lack of action towards the climate is not because of lack of foresight. I mean that you should have been living the past 10 years in a cage, or a cave, also in a cage, but if you wouldn't realize that there are things happening here. So I don't think this is a foresight fault, and I don't think that we need more foresight to create the changes. But I think we might understand the link between foresight and action better. I think it's there's a lot of psychology in if you are, just proposing one scenario that is very extreme, people lose their ability to act on it, and they also try to push it away from them. So I do personally believe that some different scenarios that is not just presenting the worst case, but also as there's been spoken about, that if we actually do something, what is it we need to do, and how can we connect those actions with other potential scenarios? So I think that there's something in that needs to be better understood, better communicated, and I think it's also, it's always this is the world is a very complex system, and understanding how to make the change is just such a complex problem that we need to be aware of our role. What can we do personally to make that change? And it's not only communicating on the foresight part. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think let's move into some questions from the audience because we have so many, and it's safe to say we will not get through all of them, but thank you all so much for putting your questions into the chat. I think let's start on this question of from Tepi, who I believe is from Cambodia, on what does it actually look like to embed an anticipatory mindset into an organization or government body. Maybe, and how do you do this? What are the most common barriers? What does that look like practically? I mean, they're all from representing different organizations themselves. So yeah, what are their takeaways? What type of things should they be trying to cultivate in their organizations?
Yeah, I mean, we have a foresight network where we work with around 30 different organizations with foresight responsibles in the various organizations, and have a lot of dialogues around how they can succeed in their role. First of all, it's not a one size fits all, and very often it becomes less about understanding the discipline of foresight and more about understanding how the organization is set up, the decision makers, their profiles, and how can you communicate to them so they understand what you're doing. And understanding foresight, for leaders' point of view, is rarely doing foresight lectures to them. It's understanding their discipline, their challenges, and then you need to do your homework with foresight and understand how it's relevant for them, and then pinpoint those exactly elements and say, given this decision you're taking now, have you considered X, Y, Z, and how does that hit you in the long run? So I think that's for me the key, and it's understanding, as Marianne said, the different layers from the individual to the macro level, and the personalities around them. And I think also what I want to say to the young leaders out there is that what I meant with the final quote is that a lot of established leaders have spent a lot of time getting to where they are and using their experience. And that is, in many cases, an advantage to have a very holistic view, lots of experience. But that experience is based on all conditions. And when they change, they have difficulties getting out of that. So I think the advantage of the young leaders is, as was also said, the adaptability to understand now the conditions has changed, and then framing those conditions and say what needs to be true given what we're saying. What are your assumptions about the future, and can we challenge that? Not because we know it will change, but because we anticipate that it might look different.
Thanks, Lasse. Marianne, Lisa, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah. So integrating anticipatory leadership in an organization is really difficult. Just a story short, during COVID-19, we tried to really, in a very subtle manner, introduce foresight and future thinking in the Philippines through webinar. So it's a series because we're doing nothing, of course, during that pandemic. And there's this one person from the Department of Education, and it's for him, it's an inspiration that we're talking about anticipatory leadership because, they are already in, in the state of they're no longer inspired to work because it's the business as usual, the system, the processes, the bureaucratic controls. But by introducing anticipatory leadership, there's hope for them. So they got excited that, oh, there's another window, there's another, framework or lens that we can use for us to be agile in the government service. So from that kind of very subtle introduction on anticipatory leadership, it really grew. And I think what's important really here is to create a community of practitioners. And of course, this cohort of young leaders would is really a good start for all of us to create a critical mass because it's important if we really want to produce anticipatory leaders, then there should be a lot of them participating in the discussion and in the operationalization. And you can always share your ideas because we started from nothing. We are not experts in foresight and futures thinking, but because of, conversation, and we tap experts from different parts of the country. So it's now a community of practitioners.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll quickly add that all of our main cohort of participants, they have to go back to their organizations after this online training to implement a multiplier. And that's maybe a really good way to start introducing the topic into their organizations. Marianne, would you like to share?
Yeah, I would like to address the question a little bit different and highlight 5 capabilities that I think that lead to anticipatory leadership. So the first one is that you are comfortable, feel comfort with ambiguity. So we can see that developments, and again, now I refer to science and technology, they emerge before impacts are fully understood. So we have to feel comfortable that there is ambiguity and not everything is being answered. In fact, there are many unanswered questions. The second is that we cultivate something that I call system thinking. So there are a lot of ripple effects of the developments that we see across sectors. So it's really important that we apply that system thinking approach. The third one, which is really important for you as young leaders, is coalition building. So, and it goes with what you, Dr. Liz, and you just said. So I believe that find ways to build coalitions within your region, within your country, to learn from each other and also to discuss all the challenges that you're facing. So often we hear what worked well and success stories, but I really believe that looking together into the stories of failure, which I don't think are true failures, but just the time was not ripe and there were many factors, something really important, so that you are not trying to implement something alone, but within a coalition. And of course, ASEF provides a wonderful platform for doing so. The fourth point I wanted to make is about honest brokering. You will see when you engage with JAS that it is a term that we use a lot. And this means that different actors perceive opportunities and risks differently. So create spaces within your coalitions, find ways of dialogue where the controversy is able to unfold, and you give counter arguments a place. And one way we do so in practice is that we work a lot with simulations and serious games, because that way you provide a safe space and you can test different grounds. And then the last one is agency. So the ability to act despite incomplete information. You will never have all information that you need for decisions. So I think it's something that we need to practice at every level and age, how we cultivate an agency despite incomplete information, which means know your sources, know what are the key questions to ask, know what are your non-negotiables, so that when you develop your agency under uncertainty, which I think perhaps is the most important capability, you are comfortable to address a future that is very complex.
Mm. Mm.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Can I
mentioned.
just add a
Go ahead,
small
Lasse.
nuance on that? I think one of my key learnings is that don't waste time convincing someone who don't believe in foresight about what to do. Find the ones that sees what you speak about, and also have a filter if their role cannot influence the future direction. They will also just be frustrated when you come and want to speak about the future because they have a different responsibility. That means that the higher in the organization you speak to, the more they're actually open for foresight as a rule of thumb. But of course, access to the highest decision makers is also much more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that comment, Lasse. I'm glad, Marianne, you mentioned systems thinking. I just want to mention this because next week we will have a whole week on systems thinking for the group. So we will be able to dive deeper into this a little bit as a capability. I want to move on to the next question because coming from Eduardo from Portugal, this is a question on well-being. So smaller organizations and startups where often everyone is wearing multiple hats and we can't afford to have someone sort of on vacation. How do you prioritize still having anticipatory leadership development and systemic advocacy without burning out your team and the well-being of the team? And I want to add this caveat that we've also seen in our reports at ASEF on young people and their perceptions of the future that there's still a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future, and it's sometimes quite hard to think about because there's just so many I don't want to say bad things happening and in the global crisis. How can young people ensure they still sort of find that balance between thinking about these things, integrating it into their organizations, but still having that sort of, I don't know, peace of mind or well-being in their teams? Anyone like to comment here?
Yep. Dr. Lisan, you first.
Okay, about the well-being. Oh, that's very important. I'm always saying this, no, that there are 5 R's in, anticipatory leadership, like retooling, reskilling, and the last part really is about re-energizing towards productivity. So well-being is, it's a fundamental human right. Yeah, so we have to value that because if we will not value that, how can we lead towards productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness in the organization? So it's always striking the balance and likewise providing an enabling framework wherein the young leaders can really express themselves and have time also to be creative and focus on their own self. But in an organization there are different types of leaders. So sometimes the difficulty really there is the close mindset, or the closed mindset of some senior leaders. So in our case, for example, in the Philippines, we intervene with our senior leaders. So they are undersecretaries, assistant secretaries. We try to influence them to have a more open mind when it comes to anticipatory leadership and, of course, the wellness of the organization. So by influencing them, they can likewise, mentor and coach the younger generation. So by doing that, you are meeting the generations, different generations, to be in the middle so that you have a sustained growth in your organization or in your community.
Thanks, Lisa. Marianne.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to emphasize is that anticipatory leadership is not necessarily about creating a foresight unit, nor is it about hiring a team of futurists. So I would say for many organizations, many are small that we work with, and anticipation really starts as a mindset rather than a dedicated function. So three practical steps I would like to give you is that first, ensure or create regular opportunities where you look beyond immediate operational pressures and where you can discuss emerging developments that could affect your mission. Then the second is diversify your perspectives to bring into decision making. We know from research on collective intelligence that it's not necessarily just about the diversity, but it's also about how you create that space. So ensure that that within that space you value, as I said before, controversial perspectives, and that you have a space, a safe space where you can hear different viewpoints. And then the third point is that ask simple questions when making strategic decisions. So, for example, is this a trend or is it a development that accelerates over the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years? How may it affect what we do today? So these are really simple terms that we see that works really well with organizations we work, and we work, as I said, with small, but also with governments and entire national strategies. So, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to those principles that we see are really working, irrespectively of your resources internally.
Thank you.
Yeah. And building on this, I fully agree in everything being said. And anticipatory leadership, the framework we've developed is exactly about prioritizing, where to put your resources. And to put it simple, you need to run faster. That's the conditions of today. You need to run faster all the time, but you also need to run in the right direction. And you need to be aware that the more time you spend on thinking about the right direction, the slower you will run. But also, if you don't dedicate enough time, you will run extremely fast in the wrong direction. And that's, that is leadership. That is your commitment. And if there were a one size fits all answer to this, we wouldn't have the session, right? So I think this is for me a key point in leadership. That is understanding how much to spend on this. My argument is that if you don't start with the foresight part, you have no clue whether you're running into a wall, or whether you should just focus the next 5 years on running faster. You don't know. So you need to start having some conversations around this. And once you have that, that will give you comfort, because more foresight is not just, it's not just about doing as much foresight as possible. A thorough exercise, maybe just 2 hours where you spend some time thinking. You might get some external advice, but thinking about what is it in the future that would influence us, and what is it related to the goal of our organization that is important. Having that dialogue, then you know where to focus, because you don't get stressed, or typically don't get stressed by uncertainty. You get stressed by inability to act on that uncertainty. If you know it's out there, but you don't feel you're addressing that is stressing you as a leader, as an employee. And if your employees does not feel that you are addressing the circumstances you are in, they will for sure also feel stressed, at least if they're committed to the whole purpose of your organization.
Thank you, all of you. I want to build on this point a little bit with a question from Denise from Singapore, semi in response to this, and let's see how we develop it. But a lot of youth leaders are told to think long term, like we're talking about, but are evaluated on short-term outputs by funders and stakeholders. How can we hold a foresight orientation when our incentives or funding might not allow us to do so? And I want to add another point on this, which is that often, in youth or student organizations, you have rotating leadership. You might have a 1-year responsibility on your youth organization executive board, for example. How can we find this balance between short term and long term in this type of situations? Lasse, would you like to jump in?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you need to have that conversation. When you feel that's what you are measured upon, then I would take the whole purpose of your organization and saying, does that align my incentives or this? And is that truly what you want me to do? Or should we discuss if there are other measurements? And I know that that might not be an easy conversation, but I truly believe that's what you should speak about. I mean, we do that in our organization. We have a lot of conversations around what are we optimizing for, what are we intensivizing for, and I think that's an extremely important conversation. And most leaders would recognize that, yeah, simple KPIs. That's basically where you are, optimizing by looking in what do you say, the front mirror, because KPIs are the conditions that drove you to where you are today. Those would only by chance be the same measures that would take you successfully into the future. So yeah, having the conversation is my advice.
Mm. I'm thinking that must be quite sort of meta to have these conversations in CIFS, when you're having the conversation about the direction of CIFS itself in the future.
Yeah, and you know the story of the shoemaker. You often think that you're too much focused on others' future and not your own.
Yeah. Marianne, would you like to jump in?
Yes, so I think it's really a question of how you build your narrative. Builds a little bit on what you just said, Lasse. I think that we often see when we work with leaders of all kinds that it's a question of how you address the question of not anticipating. Like, what is the risk if you're not anticipating X, Y, Z? So that's often an eye opener. So it's in a way some sort of comparison, a comparative analysis of look, this is what we see, and this is where we see risks if we are not taking this into account. And again, I think it's a question of how you build then the narrative around that anticipation that you would like to discuss, or anticipation per se, because often I feel it resonates to those that are working in that field, but it can be like super vague and not really concrete for those that are not engaging in that field. So I think it's important to be as specific as possible on the opportunities, but also on the risks of not anticipating for your organization, but also more broadly can be also for an entire ecosystem. So for example, in the case of Philippines, one of the key arguments, and we worked on quantum, was like, what is the cost of not applying science diplomacy and anticipation in the region and in the country? And that was an absolute constructive discussion. And I felt that after we introduced and started to talk about that, more opportunities appeared, and the appetite and will to be part of that conversation was just, to me, absolutely impressive. So this is as well an encouragement that, as you said it at the beginning, not everyone is a fan of foresight or understands the purpose. So it's your role as leader to kind of build a narrative why you think it's important. And this is not to start to start a debate that lasts over several years, but to really make a case that is digestible for your audience, for your target group, be it in your organization or even broader.
Yeah. Can I jump in? I think it should not stop in looking at term of office. Thinking long term is really about advocacy as well. So in the case of the Philippines, leadership changes. So in the past 3 years, there's really big support when it comes to foresight and future thinking. There's funding from the government to capacitate state universities and colleges. But now the leadership somehow changed its direction. It's more political rather than focusing on developmental aspects, especially on foresight and future thinking. But we anticipate that already as uh, prime movers of anticipatory in the Philippines. That's why we created the Philippine Futures Thinking Society. So if these political leaders will not, be, in anticipatory leadership, then we still have the private sector that will be doing this. So it's really more on, creating conversations, creating platforms, and in creating platforms and conversations, I really believe that we can create, a community of practitioners for that matter.
Thank you. We are starting to get to the end of today's session, so thank you so much for everyone's questions, and I'm sorry we weren't able to address all of them, but there's a couple I spotted last ones that I'm going to ask sort of more generally to invite each of our three speakers today to sort of give a closing point, thought, advice that you want to give to our youth leaders here today. What's, the key takeaway that you want everyone to remember after this session? Lasse, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think what you nurture is what you become good at, right? And don't expect that you will become an anticipatory leader without understanding that there is a discipline beneath that. And then I would say be humble about your own worldview. That might not be the right. I mean, there's engage with others that has different worldviews and try to understand them, try to understand their discipline, and try to understand how you can add value instead of the other way around, that you just try to enforce futures thinking on them, because that's rarely something people respond well to. And I would also just say keep on doing the best you can, because I think we need anticipatory leaders in the future. So hopefully this is something you will embrace.
Thank you. Lisa and Marianne, either of you?
Yeah. Oh, well, keep that passion. So your ideas are really welcome. And always think that you are our future. So you need to be anticipatory leaders. Of course, there will be more challenges along the way, but just keep on riding, you will be given the chance. For now, of course, the leadership position isn't really there, but leadership is not about position. It's really about your passion and your commitment to serve. It will be really seen on how genuine you are when you propose something that would benefit the community.
Thank you. And last but not least, Marianne.
Wonderful. So if I have learned one thing through my work at Chester, is that the future will not be shaped by those who can predict it the most accurately. It will be shaped by those who can bring together diverse perspectives, navigate uncertainty, but also mobilize action across culture sectors and borders. And I think ASEF and you as a cohort, you represent that. And again, I gave the example of quantum technology or neurotechnology, and in any other emerging fields, we have seen that there is no single actor, no single organization, discipline, or a country that holds all the answers. So as Lasse said, be humble. And the real challenge for all of us is that we create enough shared understanding and trust for collective action. So conversations like today are part of that. So my encouragement is to join as many conversations as today as possible to build that confidence. That's the essence of anticipatory leadership for me. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. This has been a really lovely discussion today. I've really enjoyed it myself, and I think I've seen how many messages in the chat and in the Q&A we've had, so I think the conversations will continue. Thank you again so much, Lasse, Marianne, and Lisanne, for joining us today, and thank you everyone also for your very interesting questions to help guide the discussions as well. I will leave it there and say thank you all very much, and we hope to see you again for next week for our next section, which is on systems thinking, which we've heard is a key capability from Marianne. And in case you're not already registered on the screen, you can see the QR code to sign up to this next session, as well as the subsequent sessions of this open webinar series as part of the ASEFYLS training this year. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you again to our panelists as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Frey.
Bye.